Picture this, a dog, wandering alone down the hallway of the 28th floor of one of the most secure luxury towers in Los Angeles. No owner in sight, no explanation, just an animal pacing back and forth in front of locked doors, in a building where a stranger cannot even get past the lobby without a personalized key fob. Somebody carried that dog up there. Somebody left her there on purpose. And within weeks, that single strange detail would unravel into one of the most disturbing disappearances Los Angeles has seen in years. A case that stretches from a billion-dollar penthouse complex to a landfill outside the city and drags with it a trail of federal fraud, hidden money, organized crime, and a woman who quietly knew far too much. Los Angeles, October of 2021. Downtown, surrounded by glass towers that catch the last of the evening light, sits an exclusive residential complex known as Hope Plus Flower. It is, in every sense of the word, a concrete fortress built specifically for people whose income places them in a different world entirely. Step inside, and residents want for nothing. There are multiple resort-style pools scattered across different levels of the property. There are private saunas. There are dedicated fitness centers with equipment most public gyms could never afford, dance studios for residents who want more than a treadmill, and event spaces built for private parties that never have to spill out into public view. But here's the thing about a building like this. The pools and the saunas and the private studios, those are just the advertised perks. The real product being sold here, the actual reason people pay these kinds of prices, is privacy. Total, uninterrupted, insulated privacy from the rest of the world. To protect that privacy, the building runs on a strict 3-layer security system. Cameras cover every entrance, every hallway, every shared space, running around the clock without pause. Access to the residential floors, the underground parking structure, and every elevator in the building is restricted to personalized electronic key fobs assigned to residents and approved guests. There is no scenario in which a random person walks in off the street and simply wanders the halls undetected. Security would intervene immediately. This is a building engineered, from the ground up, to keep unauthorized people out. And yet, inside this tightly controlled, heavily monitored environment, something happens that defies every rule the building claims to enforce. On the 28th floor, a resident comes across a dog wandering alone through a long hallway. The animal looks lost and disoriented, clearly out of place, but there is no owner anywhere nearby, no one calling after her, no one retrieving her. Someone takes the dog to a nearby veterinary clinic, where staff scan the microchip embedded beneath her skin. Within minutes, they have a name. The dog is called Seven. Her registered owner is a 39-year-old woman named Heidi Plank. But when investigators go looking for Heidi, she is nowhere to be found. Not in the building, not in the hallways, not in the parking structure, not anywhere on the property. Investigators combing through every inch of the 28th floor and the surrounding areas come up with absolutely nothing. Here is the detail that should stop you cold before we go any further. Think about it carefully. How exactly does a dog end up wandering the 28th floor of a locked, key fob-controlled luxury apartment building, completely alone? Dogs cannot swipe electronic key fobs. They cannot summon an elevator, and they certainly cannot navigate a security checkpoint on their own initiative. There is only one explanation that makes any logical sense. Someone brought Seven up to that floor, and someone left her there deliberately. The question that should be keeping you up at night is simple. Was it Heidi herself, for reasons no one yet understood, choosing to abandon her own dog inside a stranger's building? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone who needed Heidi's absence to look a certain way? Someone who needed this discovered exactly when it was discovered, and exactly how it was discovered? Before we dig any deeper into a case this layered, I want to ask you for something small. If this story already has your attention, and I promise you it only gets more disturbing from here, take a second right now and hit that subscribe button, and drop a like on this video while you're at it. Every single one of you who does that is the reason I'm able to keep digging through court filings, tracking down public records, and piecing together investigations like the one you're about to hear. I read every comment, I appreciate every one of you, and I promise, the rest of this story is worth the few seconds it takes to support the channel. Now let's talk about the scale of what this case eventually became, because it is genuinely difficult to wrap your head around. Jump forward with me 1 month, to late November of 2021, to a stretch of land about 40 minutes north of Los Angeles, near the community of Castaic. There sits the massive Chiquita Canyon landfill, an enormous sprawling site where thousands of tons of the city's waste arrive every single day of the year. Picture dozens of investigators, dressed head to toe in white protective suits and respirators, moving methodically across towering mountains of compacted trash. Heavy machinery groans as it shifts massive sections of waste aside, while detectives crouch low, sifting through the material by hand, searching for anything resembling forensic evidence. By this point in the timeline, this is no longer being treated as a routine missing person case. Authorities have officially reclassified it as a major criminal investigation, and they are searching, specifically and grimly, for human remains. So how does a luxury high-rise in the center of downtown Los Angeles end up connected to a landfill on the outer edge of the county? It sounds almost impossible when you say it out loud, but detectives were convinced, from very early on, that there was a direct and deliberate connection, and they believed the thread led all the way back to the very afternoon Seven was discovered wandering that empty hallway. As investigators began assembling the most basic facts about the missing woman's life, it became immediately clear that a standard missing person investigation was not going to get them very far. What they expected to find was straightforward: a divorced mother, raising a 10-year-old son, living a quiet life in a suburban neighborhood outside the city. What they actually found could not have been more different. The moment detectives pulled Heidi's financial records, the entire picture of who this woman was fell apart and rebuilt itself into something far more dangerous. Instead of ordinary personal disputes or minor family friction, they found her name tangled directly into federal investigations involving the theft of tens of millions of dollars and connected to people whose names were already known to federal prosecutors. Think for a moment about what it actually takes to search a landfill of that size. This is not a quick sweep with a metal detector. This is weeks of coordinated labor, cadaver dogs walking the same ground over and over, forensic anthropologists on standby in case any fragment of evidence surfaces, and a small army of investigators willing to spend entire days elbow-deep in the compacted refuse of an entire county, all in the hope of finding some trace of a woman who, weeks earlier, had simply walked into a locked apartment building and never walked back out. That is the level of resources a case has to command before authorities commit to a search like that. It tells you, more clearly than almost anything else in this story, exactly how seriously investigators had come to take the idea that Heidi Plank was murdered, and that whoever was responsible had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure her body was never found. So today, we are going to walk through, piece by piece, how a woman became a financial shield for people operating well outside the reach of the law, how that role slowly turned her into the perfect target, and how her disappearance may have been buried, quite literally, behind a wall of well-funded silence. This story actually begins 4 years before Seven was ever found wandering that hallway. Back in 2017, Heidi accepted a position as the personal assistant to a businessman named Jason Sugarman. This was not just another corporate executive. Sugarman was the son-in-law of a hugely influential Hollywood producer, a man who had once run a major film studio. Sugarman himself moved comfortably through billionaire social circles, accustomed to the kind of high-stakes business deals that most people only read about. On the surface, working for a man like this looked like an incredible career opportunity for a young assistant. But in June of 2019, that polished, glossy image came crashing down entirely. Federal investigators uncovered a massive financial fraud scheme, one that had been operating for years. According to the investigation, Sugarman and several of his business partners had illegally diverted tens of millions of dollars out of pension funds meant to protect the retirements of ordinary working people. Several of his associates were sentenced to significant prison time, with some facing as much as 15 years behind bars. Sugarman himself avoided prison entirely by reaching a settlement with federal prosecutors, paying a $10 million penalty and walking away a free man. Here is where the story takes its strangest turn. It was right in the middle of that unfolding scandal that Heidi's career took a leap that, on paper, made absolutely no sense. She went from being an ordinary executive assistant to becoming the chief financial officer of Sugarman's investment firm, a company called Camden Capital Partners. There is just one glaring problem with that promotion. Heidi had no formal financial education whatsoever, not a single degree in accounting, not a background in finance, nothing on her resume that would explain why she was suddenly overseeing the finances of a multi-million-dollar investment operation. Even more surprising, official corporate records listed her as the company's only employee, despite the firm supposedly managing operations worth millions of dollars. And here, in my opinion, is the single strangest detail uncovered while fact-checking this entire case. The investment company was officially registered, on paper, at Heidi's own home address, in the small city of Downey. Let's be honest with each other for a moment. That does not look like the headquarters of a legitimate multi-million-dollar investment firm. That looks like a company that existed mostly on paper, a name and an address used to move money without drawing the wrong kind of attention. Stop and think about what that arrangement actually means in practice. A company registered at a private residence in a modest suburban city with exactly one name attached to it and no visible staff, no office lease, no corporate footprint of any kind, is not how a legitimate investment firm operates. It is, however, exactly how you might structure something you needed to look legitimate on paper while keeping the real decision-making and the real money somewhere else entirely. Whether Heidi fully understood the role she had been placed in, or whether she simply told herself it was just an unusual job with a generous paycheck attached, is something we will likely never know for certain. What we do know is that her name and her signature were now permanently tied to a firm connected to a man who had already settled with federal prosecutors once. And she was paid extremely well for playing that role. Her annual salary climbed to $125,000. She owned a home valued at roughly $1.5 million. Sitting in her garage was a brand new Range Rover, worth approximately $90,000. From the outside looking in, it read as a genuine success story. A woman who had climbed from assistant to CFO in just a few short years, rewarded handsomely for her hard work. In reality, Heidi had become something else entirely. She had become a convenient financial shield, a name and a signature that let someone else's money move quietly through the system without a more recognizable face attached to it. Documents and funds connected to a businessman under federal investigation for massive fraud passed directly through her hands. She knew about the hidden transactions her boss was involved in because her own name was on the paperwork that made those transactions possible. And knowledge like that has a way of stopping being someone else's problem. Sooner or later, it becomes your own burden to carry. And for Heidi, that burden grew heavier by the month, until it started to feel like something she could no longer outrun. To really understand just how vulnerable Heidi was, by the time real danger entered her life, we need to rewind even further, back to 2015, long before she was ever handed that questionable executive title. That year, she went through a severe and sudden mental health crisis. One day, seemingly without any obvious external trigger, she experienced an acute psychotic episode. She completely destroyed her son's bedroom in what witnesses described as a frenzy, then climbed out of a window, while only partially dressed, scaled over a neighbor's fence, and made her way onto the roof of a nearby house. Officers who responded to the emergency call documented that she was in an extreme state of emotional distress and severe agitation, unable to calm herself or explain what was happening. But what happened after officers arrived is, in some ways, even more unsettling. Heidi herself asked to be voluntarily admitted to a specialized psychiatric facility. While under medical supervision there, she genuinely and repeatedly insisted that she did not have a son. Witnesses on staff at the time later recalled an especially chilling moment when Heidi looked down at the scar left by her cesarean section with total confusion and asked, with complete sincerity, how it had gotten there. Try to sit with how disorienting that must have been, not just for the people around her, but for Heidi herself, once she came back to full awareness of who she was. To lose, even briefly, the memory of your own child, to look at a scar on your own body left by the birth of that same child, and feel nothing but confusion, is the kind of experience that leaves a mark long after the medical crisis itself has passed. It tells you that underneath the composed, successful version of Heidi that people would later see climbing the ranks at Camden Capital, there was a woman who already knew firsthand what it felt like for her own mind to become unreliable under enough pressure. Over time, with carefully managed medication, her condition stabilized. She returned to her normal daily routine, and from the outside, her life appeared to get back on track completely. But this documented episode tells us something crucial about who Heidi was underneath the surface. Her mental health had already demonstrated, years earlier, that it could fracture completely under the right kind of extreme stress. And stress, unfortunately, was never in short supply in Heidi's life. That included her personal relationships. She and her former husband, a man named Jim Wayne, had divorced years earlier, following a marriage that lasted only 2 years. Jim was 24 years older than Heidi, a successful and fairly conservative hairstylist working out of Beverly Hills. The two of them shared custody of their son, and for the most part, managed to co-parent reasonably well. But disagreements over how strictly to raise their son never fully disappeared. Jim believed firmly in structure and consistent rules. Heidi preferred a much more relaxed, permissive parenting style, and that fundamental difference created ongoing friction between them. Her current relationship added yet another layer of pressure to an already complicated life. Her boyfriend at the time, a man named Naeem, lived in San Francisco, roughly 400 miles away from Los Angeles. Because the two of them only saw each other occasionally, the long-distance nature of the relationship often led to frustration and recurring arguments that neither of them ever fully resolved. Now let's return to the fall of 2021, just weeks before the incident inside the empty hallways of that high-rise. Under the combined weight of other people's financial secrets and the mounting pressure in her own personal life, Heidi's behavior begins to change dramatically. She repeatedly tells Naeem that she's living with an overwhelming, near-constant sense of anxiety. During phone calls, she openly admits she's afraid of someone, that she genuinely believes she is in danger, but every single time, she stops short of saying who. Then, shortly before she vanishes entirely, she sends her ex-husband Jim a text message that immediately stands out from anything she'd sent before. Completely out of nowhere, she warmly thanks him for everything he has done for their growing son. Jim later tells investigators that the message did not feel like an ordinary expression of gratitude between two co-parents. To him, in hindsight, it sounded much more like a final goodbye. The kind of message someone sends when they suspect they won't get another chance to say it. Now I want you to pay very close attention to one technical detail, because it completely dismantles any theory that this was some kind of spontaneous, spur-of-the-moment disappearance. As detectives continued digging into the case, they uncovered an absolutely astonishing fact. The GPS tracking feature on Heidi's luxury SUV and the location tracking on her Apple Watch had both been manually disabled. Sit with that for a second. What kind of modern, socially active woman intentionally disconnects herself from the digital world in that specific, deliberate way? You do not accidentally stumble through the settings menu of both your vehicle and your smartwatch and switch off location tracking on both devices. That is not a random tap. That is not some kind of software glitch. That is a calculated decision, made by someone who genuinely believes their every movement is being tracked and watched. Heidi was clearly, deliberately trying to make herself invisible. The only real question left is invisible to whom? Was she trying to avoid federal investigators still circling her boss's financial dealings? Or was she hiding from the very people whose dirty money had been quietly flowing through her home computer for years? What happened in the days immediately following Heidi's disappearance only makes this entire case stranger. To really understand how the events unfolded, it helps to walk through the timeline, exactly as investigators eventually reconstructed it. Just 2 days later, on October the 19th, before anyone had officially filed a missing person report, and before this story had reached a single news outlet, something happened that investigators still struggle to fully explain. A security camera outside Heidi's home in Downey captured an almost surreal scene playing out on the front porch. Jason Sugarman, the multimillionaire owner of the investment firm, personally drove out to the modest suburban house belonging to his missing employee and left a box of muffins on her front porch. What was that visit actually about? Was it a genuine, heartfelt act of concern from a worried employer checking in on someone who hadn't shown up to work? Or was it a carefully calculated excuse to legally show up at Heidi's front door and confirm, with his own eyes, whether or not she was actually home, all while knowing full well that the security camera mounted outside would capture every single second of the visit? But the most revealing part of this entire episode comes immediately afterward. Sugarman begins repeatedly calling Jim, and here's what should jump out at you immediately. He never once asks where Heidi might be. He never asks whether she's safe, whether anyone has heard from her, whether there's any reason to worry. The only thing this powerful, well-connected businessman seems to care about, according to the record, is getting his hands on Heidi's work laptop as quickly as humanly possible. Jim immediately recognizes how serious this situation has become, and he passes along a critical statement to investigators, one that is preserved in the official report, almost word for word. She knows everything about his company. She knows where the evidence is. The following day, October the 20th, becomes the true turning point in this entire case. That afternoon, Heidi never arrives to pick up her son from school, breaking a routine she had followed without fail for years. That single missed pickup is the moment everyone around her realizes this isn't a business trip, isn't a few impulsive days away to clear her head. Heidi has simply vanished, completely and totally. An official missing person investigation opens almost immediately. Jim reacts fast. By October the 26th, he files an emergency petition asking the court to grant him full legal custody of their 11-year-old son. At first glance, that legal move raises eyebrows among reporters covering the case. Some question why he acted so quickly when Heidi had only recently gone missing, whether there was something suspicious in the timing itself. But once you actually read through the court documents, his reasoning becomes very clear. He urgently needed sole legal authority so that his deeply traumatized son could begin professional therapy without any further delay. Under California law, he could not authorize those medical decisions on his own without the other parent's consent. And with Heidi missing, that consent simply was not available. Then, on November the 4th, investigators make a discovery that completely upends their early theory that Heidi had disappeared entirely of her own free will. Detectives locate her gray Range Rover, but it is not parked anywhere near the luxury apartment complex where Seven was found wandering the hallway. Instead, it is sitting quietly inside the underground garage of an entirely different residential building, located just a few blocks away. Someone had deliberately moved that SUV to a separate parking garage, and it looks very much like an intentional effort to throw investigators off the trail entirely. For a while, that move worked almost perfectly. What investigators ran into next became one of the single biggest obstacles in the entire case. The management of the Hope Plus Flower Complex repeatedly delayed investigators' access to the building's surveillance system, citing a rotating list of legal reasons and procedural concerns. Ask yourself a simple question here. Why would a luxury residential building work so hard, over and over again, to slow down an official criminal investigation into a missing resident's disappearance? The answer, when you really sit with it, seems fairly obvious. Every single day of delay bought someone more time, because the surveillance footage inside that building was only stored for a limited window before the system automatically overwrote it. While investigators fought corporate attorneys just to get access to the building's own digital archives, an unsettling set of rumors began quietly spreading among the building's residents. Neighbors recalled hearing what sounded distinctly like a gunshot coming from one of the upper floors just a few weeks before Heidi vanished. Then there was another story circulating through the building. On the very same day Heidi disappeared, a private party was reportedly taking place somewhere inside the complex. According to rumors passed between residents, someone attending that gathering suffered a fatal overdose involving prohibited substances, and the body was allegedly removed quietly, in order to avoid drawing any unwanted attention to the wealthy owners of those multi-million-dollar apartments. Whether or not those specific rumors were ever confirmed, one thing about this case became painfully obvious. The wall of silence surrounding that building proved to be even stronger than the concrete structure holding it up. Think about what that silence actually costs a family. Somewhere in that building, on the night Heidi disappeared, there were almost certainly people who saw something, heard something, or knew something that could have shaved weeks off this investigation. Doormen, valet staff, neighbors passing through the hallway. And yet, for reason after reason, the information that should have flowed freely to detectives arrived late, arrived incomplete, or never arrived at all. In a case like this, delay is not a neutral, harmless thing. Every week that passed without answers was a week where trails went cold, memories faded, and whoever was responsible had more time to make sure nothing led back to them. Now that we understand just how much weight and how many of other people's secrets Heidi had been quietly carrying, it's time to reconstruct October the 17th, minute by minute, exactly as investigators eventually pieced it together. Later that afternoon, Heidi walks out of her house. A security camera captures her wearing completely ordinary, unremarkable clothing. Dark jeans, a light-colored t-shirt with a smiley face design printed across the front, and a lightweight sweater tied casually around her waist. Seven walks beside her on a leash. At first glance, this looks like nothing more than a routine trip out to attend her son's school event that evening. But when forensic investigators later search her empty home, they discover something that immediately jumps out. Her cell phone is still sitting untouched on the kitchen table, exactly where she left it. This was almost certainly one final, deliberate attempt to completely erase her digital trail before whatever came next. At around 5 o'clock that evening, Heidi arrives at a local school, where her son's regular football game is just about to begin. Jim, who is also in the stands that night, later gives investigators a remarkably detailed description of her behavior throughout the game. He says Heidi looked extremely anxious the entire time, unable to sit still for more than a few seconds at a stretch. She would sit down on the cold metal bleachers, immediately get back up, and pace back and forth restlessly along the edge of the field. This was not the normal, familiar nervousness of a parent simply watching their child play. Jim could tell, even in the moment, that her mind was somewhere else entirely. She seemed to be expecting something, anticipating some kind of arrival or confrontation. She was clearly under intense stress, constantly scanning the crowd around her as if she genuinely believed someone might be watching her from somewhere in that stadium. Then, during halftime, something happens that is completely out of character for a woman who had, up to that point, never missed a single important moment in her son's life. Without saying a single word to anyone, Heidi suddenly turns around and walks away from the stadium entirely. No explanation given to anyone nearby, no goodbye to Jim, not even a few final words to her own son, whose birthday, notably, was only a few days away at that point. At the time, Jim doesn't panic, and he doesn't try to stop her from leaving. He assumes, reasonably enough, that since her weekend plans with Naeem in San Francisco had fallen through earlier that week, she had simply decided to drive up there on her own to try to work things out with him in person. Not one of the dozens of people at that field on that cool October evening had any idea whatsoever that they were watching Heidi alive for the very last time. About an hour and a half later, at approximately 6:30 that evening, an exterior security camera, positioned at that same gated luxury high-rise, captures the final confirmed footage of Heidi that will ever exist. Night is just beginning to fall across the city. She walks confidently along the well-lit sidewalk outside the building, holding Seven's leash firmly in one hand. If you look closely at those few remaining seconds of footage, one particular detail immediately stands out. Compared to the earlier footage recorded outside her own house that same afternoon, she is no longer carrying her purse. Most likely, investigators believe she left it behind inside her SUV, the exact same vehicle that someone would later move into the underground garage of a neighboring building, in what appears to have been a deliberate effort to throw investigators off the trail entirely. Heidi walks through the building's secured entrance and disappears from view. From that single moment forward, there are no confirmed sightings of her, anywhere, ever again. Whatever happened behind those secured doors can only be pieced together now through official court records. Years later, the court formally concluded that she most likely died at approximately 9 o'clock that same evening, inside that building. And this is where I find myself circling back to the exact same question, over and over again. Think about it for a moment, seriously. How does a person simply vanish, completely and without a trace, inside a building where security cameras cover virtually every hallway, every entrance, and every shared common area on every single floor? According to investigators, whatever happened to Heidi took place within that narrow 3-hour window between 6:30 and 9 that evening. Afterward, someone had to move quickly and methodically to eliminate any forensic evidence left behind. Seven was simply left wandering an empty hallway on the 28th floor, and Heidi was gone entirely. Investigators believe her remains were most likely removed from the building without attracting any attention whatsoever, possibly transported out through service elevators or through areas of the building connected directly to its waste disposal system. This does not look like the aftermath of a random, chaotic confrontation. It looks, instead, like a carefully planned cleanup operation, carried out with precision inside one of the most heavily monitored residential buildings in the entire city of Los Angeles. And that is really the detail that separates this case from 1,000 other disappearances. Most people who vanish leave behind at least one loose thread, one witness, one grainy frame of footage, one careless mistake made in a moment of panic. Whoever was responsible for what happened to Heidi Plank left almost nothing. No struggle visible on any camera, no confirmed exit captured on film, no trace of her remains, despite an exhaustive search of an entire landfill. That level of precision does not happen by accident, and it does not happen without either extraordinary luck or extraordinary planning, possibly both. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who is truly following this shocking story all the way through, because what comes next is the part that finally connects every piece of this case together. In 2023, the court reached its formal legal conclusion. Heidi was officially declared deceased. But the biggest breakthrough in truly understanding what may have happened to her did not arrive until 2025, when NBC News released the findings of its own independent investigation into the case. Suddenly, it became much easier to understand exactly why so many potential witnesses inside that luxury tower had remained so completely silent for so long. According to that investigation, illegal high-stakes poker clubs had reportedly been operating on the upper floors of the building, allegedly connected to organized crime groups with ties to Russian and Israeli networks. Detectives confirmed they had, in fact, conducted raids at the property in connection with these operations. The residents of that building were not staying quiet purely out of vague, generalized fear. Any statement given to investigators could have exposed a sprawling, multi-million-dollar, illegal gambling operation running quietly beneath their own feet, and very few people in that building were willing to take that risk on behalf of a neighbor they barely knew. Suddenly, a lot of the smaller, stranger details from earlier in this case start to make a different kind of sense. The building's reluctance to hand over surveillance footage, the rumors of a gunshot that no one wanted to formally report, the whispers about a quietly removed body from a private party. None of it needs to be directly tied to Heidi's disappearance to explain why an entire building full of wealthy, privacy-obsessed residents closed ranks the moment police started asking questions. When people believe that cooperating with an investigation might expose their own involvement in something illegal, they tend to remember less, see less, and say less, whether or not they actually know anything relevant to the case at hand. That is not proof of a conspiracy against Heidi specifically, but it is a strong, uncomfortable explanation for why a building wired with cameras on every floor somehow produced almost nothing useful in the weeks that mattered most. And what about Jason Sugarman, the boss who seemed so determined to recover Heidi's work laptop in those first frantic days, yet never once asked whether she was safe? As of the middle of 2026, he remains a free man. He has never been charged in connection with Heidi's disappearance. Despite weeks upon weeks of exhaustive searching and countless tons of waste excavated with heavy machinery at that Southern California landfill, Heidi's remains have never been found. To this day, no one has been arrested in connection with this case. When I sit back and look at how this entire story unfolds, one conclusion keeps rising to the surface, over and over again. Heidi Plank became the perfect target. She spent years serving as the financial shield for people entangled in sophisticated, high-stakes financial schemes, and she spent her final evening alive inside a building that investigators would later directly connect to an underground criminal operation running just above the residents' heads. In the end, a woman who simply knew far too much about other people's dirty money quietly disappeared, and the silence that followed her disappearance has proven far more durable than the case against anyone responsible for it. Somewhere in Downey, a son is growing up without his mother, celebrating birthdays she should have been there for, without a single definitive answer about what actually happened to her that October night. Somewhere in that same city, an investment firm that once operated out of a modest suburban home, has long since dissolved. Its only listed employee declared legally dead by a court that could reach a conclusion about her fate, but never about who was responsible for it. And somewhere inside a still operating luxury tower in downtown Los Angeles, residents continue coming and going through key fob-controlled doors, walking past hallways where a woman's final confirmed moments were once captured on camera, most of them likely never giving it a second thought. Let me know what you think about this case down in the comments below. I read every single theory carefully, because every now and then, a completely fresh set of eyes notices some small detail that the official investigation may have overlooked entirely. And if you want to be here the moment the next case drops, make sure that subscribe button is already hit, because on this channel, the next investigation is always right around the corner.